Here we are at long last, Jonah 4. We're gonna do most of it today. Not because we couldn't talk about this for weeks and weeks. We definitely could. But because there's kind of a broader theme that I want to peel back over kind of the whole book with our last Sunday school, which is our next Sunday school. How crazy is that? So today we're going to be in Jonah 4. And we'll start the way we always do, which is to actually read Jonah 4 and just ask ourselves, what is weird in this chapter? What strikes us as odd, confusing, too specific, too vague, problematic, incorrect, whatever. So let's go into Jonah 4 and see what we find. So actually, let's start end of Jonah 3 to give us a little context to what Jonah's reacting to here. So Jonah 3, verse 10. When God saw what they did, that is the Ninevites, how they turned from their evil way, God relented of the disaster that he had said he would do to them, and he did not do it. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, "O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." And the Lord said, "Do you do well to be angry?" Say that to my children a lot. Jonah went out of the city and sat to the east of the city and made a booth for himself there. He sat under it in the shade till he should see what would become of the city. Now the Lord God appointed a plant and made it come up over Jonah, that it might be a shade over his head to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. But when dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant so that it withered. When the sun rose, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah so that he was faint. And he asked that he might die, and said, "It is better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Do you do well to be angry for the plant?" And he said, "Yes, I do well to be angry enough to die." And the Lord said, "You pity the plant for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should not I pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle?" The end. Credits. Okay. I mean, that was all pretty straightforward, but anybody have any hang-ups, any weird things that they notice? Ending, what's weird about the ending? Yeah. There's no closure, right? We have this dialogue between God and Jonah, but we don't get to hear Jonah's answer, right? We end on a question. Very similar to how Jesus ends the prodigal son. We are given a kind of a challenge that requires a response, and then that response is left unknown to us. So yeah, that's weird. What else is weird? Yeah, what makes you say that? What seems dramatic here? Yeah.
Yeah, he says he wants to die 4 times
Yeah.
in the chapter.
So, etc. Yeah. My wife feels bad when she throws away a plant. She's never wanted to throw herself away because of a plant, so that's weird. And yeah, he iterates this over and over and over. It's better for me to die than to live. That's not normal behavior. That is deeply unwell behavior. So that's strange. Yeah, he's very stubborn. It's one of he's very much mirroring another character in the Bible here, who also has a temper tantrum and also has no good response when God tries to talk to him. But we'll get to that. So yeah, he's really does not come off well here in the ending. What else seems strange?
Annoyed about characteristics that are part of God.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to like who God is. He quotes a very famous verse about God and his character, and says, "This is why I ran away, because I knew you were like this." So that's weird for a Hebrew prophet to do.
He obviously managed to get by prophet school.
Yeah, well, I mean, the rabbis think that this is one of the guys who was taught by like Elisha. Elisha has like a school of prophets that we hear about in Kings. And also, the rabbis rightly point out that he has a lot of Elijah characteristics, which is probably why the rabbis have a tradition that maybe this was the kid that Elijah resurrected. That this is someone who is very much grown up in the fold of Elijah. If you read Elijah in Kings, the only thing Elijah cares about is justice. And Jonah is very similar. In fact, there's a rabbinic tradition that the reason Elijah had to be taken up into heaven is because he just wouldn't quit. God was like, you gotta go. We gotta, come on. So yeah, he's very, he's in a prophetic tradition for sure. But if you read Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all these guys, they have horrible, horrible things to say, really daunting, terrible messages about justice that are quite challenging. And yet, in the vast majority of them, there is always this turn toward mercy that happens. And Jonah doesn't seem to have, he seemed to skip that part of class, the mercy section, the compliment sandwich of prophecy or whatever. So yeah, he really, because again, like we don't know that much about Jonah up to this point, right? This is where we really get the most kind of flavor out of Jonah as a character. And it's spicy. He's a spicy flavor as a prophet. What else is weird here?
Went out of the city and waited to see what would happen.
Yeah.
Was he expecting like fireworks show or something? I mean, what?
Yeah, what was he expecting? Why leave the city? Because he exposes himself to the elements out here, which if you're in, that area of the world, not a kind or forgiving place to just hang out outside. Anything else?
Even though God has demonstrated that He's sovereign, He created a situation to persecute Jonah, then saved him from it. And then Jonah turns around and says, "I told you so, God. This is what was going to happen."
Yeah. Yeah, it is funny. There is a really interesting dynamic in the prophets. If you go through the Bible, anytime someone asks God to be merciful, God always does it. Pretty much every time. And in fact, I think it's in Jeremiah, but it might be in Ezekiel. There is one time where God specifically tells a prophet, "Do not ask me to do this." Almost as if, and we know this is the mind of God, right? But almost as if you ask me to do this, I'm going to have to be merciful. So it's weird for Jonah to be like, "God, I knew it. You're a pushover." Very weird. We don't hear we hear prophets like go back and forth with God, like Moses and Jeremiah and people like that. Yeah, this isn't the same as Moses, like when all the Israelites are mad at him and they're having to make bricks without, straw and all that, where Moses is like, something went wrong. Like everything has gone right, and Jonah is still very upset. Yeah, it's a weird way to talk to God too. He doesn't talk about like what about all the things the Ninevites have done? Is that really fair? He's just like, I knew you were like this. And then he quotes the most famous verse in the Old Testament and is like, gotcha. Weird. He's a weird dude. What else?
Structurally, it seems interesting. The end of Jonah 3 seems to kind of preamble Jonah 4.
Yep.
But like, I don't know, it feels like, yeah, God already did the thing. And then we have this reaction from Jonah. And then it feels like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It just feels like it's like a replay back to the beginning, where it's just like, so Jonah went out of the city. And then like we get the account of like what happened that made him angry.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels. You can, and it's a pretty interesting exercise, to actually parallel what happens in Jonah 4 to what happens in Jonah 1. There's a lot of similarities. God does something or says something that Jonah does not like, so Jonah leaves, and then a lot of things happen. It's also interesting then to notice what's different about those parallels, which we'll see if we get to that. Anything else? There's one detail that really hits me in here just because I'm a stickler for continuity and things making sense. Yeah, that's weird. Cows. I like cows, but I also eat them, so I don't know. Is God worried about wasted beef? I don't know. It's a weird thing to end. You know, there's the thing called like the recency effect. The last thing you say in a speech is the thing that everybody remembers. So like, why this? You know, you think you would end on something like, and I'm the Lord, or something like that. And instead, in fact, in the Yom Kippur service where they read Jonah, they'll often sing this kind of last part. And so you have this big build up to the end. And the last line of this song is, and also much cattle. So it's weird. It's a weird way to ring in the new year. So yeah, that seems strange. Anything else?
The plant is always weird. The plant that springs up in a day.
Yeah, it's a plant that springs up in a day. Also, why does God make a plant spring up? Yeah, so notice this. I think we missed this. Jonah goes and he makes a booth, which is a weird way to put that, right? He like sets up a lemonade stand. He sets up like a tent, like a shelter. And it literally says in verse 5, he sat under it in the shade. He is shaded. He has a shelter already. And then God makes a plant to shade over his head. Redundant. So why plant? Anything else before we jump in? Why worm? Yeah. It says that you could kill a plant a lot of ways. Trust me, I've done a lot of them, and so have my sons. A worm seems specific. Yeah. God uses all kinds of weird tools in Jonah. Never picks up an Allen wrench or anything. It's like fish and storms and worms and plants. So
Jonah is also willing to die for a plant.
yeah. What is it? Do you do well to do angry? Yes, I do well to be angry enough to die. Has my 3-year-old said that to me? Basically, but he's 3 and Jonah presumably is not. So I'm not sure. Yeah, why? What is so meaningful? Notice, this is the only time in the whole story that Jonah is happy. The one time is when this plant shows up. He is exceedingly glad. A lot of things have happened, including Jonah being saved from dying. And this is the thing that makes him go, oh, nice. And then as soon as it gets taken away, he is suicidal. And angrily suicidal. So, what's going on? Okay, so let's jump in here. So the first thing, what Maddie pointed out, there's an interesting kind of call and response here, end of Jonah 3 and Jonah 4. And you don't see it because the ESV translates it out. But there's a word play happening here. So in Jonah 3, verse 10, when God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way, that word evil is the word ra. So they turned from their ra way. And like a lot of words in the English language, Hebrew words can have more than one meaning. So ra, the image I think is like a dish shattering, right? It's like something being just like shattered into pieces. So ra can mean evil, which is typically how we translate this, which I think is right. And then it says, God relented of the disaster that he had said he would do to them. That word disaster is also ra. So God relents. So God relents of the disaster he was going to do. And we talked about last time, this word relent, naham, this is like a mourning word. The literal Hebrew here, it's like an onomatopoeia. It's like when you are like weeping and your breathing is like really intense. That's the image here. Usually when we see this word, it's in the context of people mourning for people who've died or being comforted for that. So God sees the Ninevites turn from their evil way, and the image we have is him like sobbing over the thought of what he was going to do to them, which is, that's a big reaction, especially from God, to invoke this idea of like, as if someone has died. The thought of God enacting something just upon these people, to him hits the same as like when Jesus goes to Lazarus's tomb and mourns his friend, right? So then what's interesting and what we don't see in the English, and especially not in the ESV because they're trying to make things super clear, is that we have this double ra happen with Jonah. So this is God in Jonah 3. He sees them turn from their ra, and then he turns from his ra, right? Not his evil, but from the disaster he was going to bring on. So the destructive evil that these people were doing, God now is going to relent from bringing about just destruction upon Nineveh. Then Jonah. The literal Hebrew is something to the effect of, this seemed an exceedingly evil thing to Jonah. And the Hebrew's a little funky because we're doing some like weird grammar things, but there's a double ra here. So the way you could put it, although it kind of robs it of its gravity, this seemed like a rah thing to Jonah, right? An evil thing. So notice that dynamic, that kind of interplay there. God sees the Ninevites, both of them see something. God sees the Ninevites turn from their evil way, and he turns from his ra. That's his response to these people repenting. God, another way to think about it is, God does not return their ra with ra, right? He does not return their evil with evil, their destruction with destruction. Jonah sees God do this, and he thinks, not the Ninevites, by the way. He's not talking about them. He's talking about this. This seems like an exceedingly evil thing to Jonah, which we might be like, come on. But there is something to the idea, like it is one thing when someone does something evil, if someone commits a murder or a heinous crime. There is something especially evil when someone has the power and the authority to bring justice to that situation and chooses not to do it, right? We see this in the courts, in government. This is a thing that gets talked about a lot, is when people feel that someone who has done ra gets a pass. Something about just letting evil slide, letting people just get away with stuff, that there's something extra evil about that. You could have done something and you did nothing. So there's something, we're obviously meant to see this as ridiculous for Jonah, but there's something very relatable about this. Jonah is watching a people that the author of Jonah has been kind of hinting at will probably destroy Israel someday, and they do. And Jonah sees a chance for them to be justly destroyed, and then they repent, and God also repents. That's the word here, one way to translate it, of doing that. To Jonah, there is something really evil about this. Rabbi David Foreman, when he talks about this story, he talks about, imagine you are in this situation where something horrible has happened to your child or a relative, a loved one, and the judge in your case says, hey, I want you to go stop by their house, and they'll just say sorry, and then you guys can go your way and we'll just let bygones be bygones, right? With no other punishment. You'd be mad, right? You'd be very angry. But now imagine that the person who says that is God, right? That's a whole other thing. The person who has all the power, all the authority to bring justice down on people, even, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. That person is abdicating doing that. Foreman reads this as, this is why Jonah runs away. He can't even process that thought that God will just pardon these people potentially. That it's almost this emotional reaction. I don't know about that, but there is something to, I think we are meant to see this more sympathetically than we often do, that what Jonah is seeing is a massive breach of justice, that God is not being just. And we'll see him talk more about this. He has something really, this chapter is gutting. So he sees this as exceedingly angry. And then now notice what he does. Now he prays, which has been a problem for Jonah. Jonah has been silent for most of this book. And now when this happens, he wasn't praying when he was on a boat in a storm going to die. But now that he sees this happen, now he prays. And his prayer is not nice. It's weird. He says, is this not what I said when I was yet in my country? Another instance of Jonah saying something that we never heard him say, but it seems like he did. Maybe there was a conversation between Jonah and God. Maybe Jonah just thought this. Maybe he said this to someone else. We're not really told. It's kind of like what happens with the sailors, where we find out that he'd already told them he was running away from God. I truly don't know what to make of that. It's a very weird detail. So if any of you find something interesting in that, let me know. But then he gives this speech. This is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. We're going to come back to that at the end, because it's he's quoting, but he's misquoting, and it's very important how he misquotes. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. And the Lord said, do you do well to be angry? Jonah went out of the city and sat to the east of the city and made a booth for himself there. So 2 big parallels in the Torah that are going to jump out to any Jewish reader. Oh, no. Worse. Okay, well, maybe I'll just talk. So 2 things jump out. So first, Jonah says, "Oh Lord, is this not what I said when I was yet in my country?" The literal Hebrew there is, was this not my word? And it's an interesting construction. It's a weird way to say this. And probably the reason it's a weird construction is because it's supposed to take us back to Exodus 14. So if you want to flip there, you can. We're going to be in verse 10. So in Exodus 14, thank you. Does it? Okay. This is better. Thank you. It's not exactly, perfect. So the Israelites have left Egypt. All the plagues and things have happened. And then, thank you again. And now Pharaoh, they're at the Red Sea, and Pharaoh is like, whoa, my economy is going to shatter. I better go get my slaves back. Whoops. And then we get to verse 10. When Pharaoh drew near with his army, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Is this not what we said in the country we were in? Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. So the parallel here, we have Jonah, who is harking us back to this time where these people have just experienced profound deliverance. They've seen the power of God. working on their behalf. They have seen their own firstborn sons be spared and the firstborn sons of Egypt being destroyed. And then this moment comes. They're pinned between the sea and Pharaoh, and their response is, why didn't you just leave us where we were? Right? There's this sudden suspicion of whether God is really for them or not. Right? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. For some reason, God has led us out here to die out here at the hands of an army. There's some sense of doubting, even in the midst of all kinds of signs that God is for them and will provide for them and protect them, that actually he's just going to destroy them. Actually, he's not strong enough, or he's not caring enough, or whatever, to save them now. And then they're going to be delivered through waters. And here we have Jonah, who has already been delivered through waters, saying something very similar. But, he's not, at least it doesn't seem like he's talking about like, oh God, you want to kill me. But there might be something else going on there, which we'll circle back to. Because the other parallel that is absolutely screaming at you, if you know your Torah, is Jonah keeps doing Cain stuff. So the word for angry, the literal Hebrew is like heat. Like your face gets hot anger. The first time we see that is in Genesis 4. And it's not God, although God does get hot anger in the Bible. It is Cain. If we're in Genesis 4, let's go to verse 3, so we have all the context. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, exceedingly angry, and his face fell. So Cain sees God show favor to someone other than him. He feels rejected, and he becomes very angry. Jonah sees God show mercy to this pagan people. We might be starting to get a hint at what is going on underneath Jonah. Is it just that he wants these Ninevites to die? Is it just like, politically speaking, it would be better for us if we eliminated this enemy? Or is there something else happening there? Is there some sense of, if God does this, then the math is God must not love me, or God must not love us? And then we keep going. Cain does some things, and the Lord punishes him. And when we get to verse 16, Cain went away from the presence of the Lord, something that Jonah has already done. And he settled in the land of Nod. The literal Hebrew there is he sat down in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And what does Jonah do in Jonah 4 after he has this conversation with God? Oh, which also, God says, do you do well to be angry? God says the same kind of thing to Cain. If you do well, won't you be accepted? So similar conversation. And then after this conversation, Jonah leaves. He goes east and he sits down. And he makes a booth, which, haven't we all made a booth at some point? So there's an interesting contrasting image here, because the word booth here is the word sukkot. Anybody know the significance of this word in the Bible, sukkot?
Isn't there a town that's basically named Succoth? Isn't Succoth?
Ooh, I don't know if those might be related. I'm not sure. Succoth, I think. It's Succoth, I think. I don't know. That's good. But there's another big, there's one that if you're a Jewish person, you definitely know what this is referring to. There's a few festivals you need to observe every year, and one of them is the festival of Sukkot. It's a time where you, basically everyone in Israel goes out and lives, they build booths, they build tents, and they live out in the wilderness, and they have a 7-day Sabbath. full week of Sabbath. And what's interesting about Sukkot is if you look at the command of how you do this, you're supposed to build this out of the branches of fruit trees. And you're supposed to get those fruit trees from trees that are near a river. And it says literally, it's almost word for word, you like take of the fruit tree, right? So you have big Eden energy coming off of here. Not only are we being reminded of the time that Israel was wandering in the wilderness, it's more than that. It's that, the way Tim Mackey puts this, and I think he's borrowing from someone else, is that you are, in the wilderness, you are creating a tiny Eden in the wilderness. And this is a big equalizing day. Everyone has to do this. Does not matter if you're rich, does not matter if you're poor, man or woman, adult or child. Everyone is going out, leaving their homes, and building these tents out of fruit trees to remind themselves that God is able to bring Eden into unlikely places. And that Eden is better than what they're currently living in. Another interesting thing about Sukkot is that it's a big day of hospitality, because you don't keep your booth for yourself. In Deuteronomy, when we elaborate on this, it says, "You shall rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter, your servant and your female servant, the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow who are within your towns. For 7 days you shall keep the feast to the Lord your God at the place that the Lord will choose, because the Lord your God will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hands, so that you will be altogether joyful." So notice, you are inviting the widow, the orphan, the immigrant to a feast, a week-long feast in a place that you built. This is big bless the nations energy here. Everyone gets invited into this little Eden. Yeah.
Just as a note, Sukkot, the town is from the root Sukkot, which is why the word, it means booth.
Okay.
The town, which if you go to Genesis 33, which is where it comes up,
Okay.
there's actually a really neat parallel to chew on there, because it's
Ooh.
talking about, it's after Jacob and Esau split ways. And then Jacob goes and builds booths there, which is why it's called Sukkot.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh. Ooh, and that's when Israel, they've just reconciled, but also now they're going separate ways. That's good. Write that down. Genesis 33. So good pull there. This day is so focused on hospitality, actually, that if we go to Zechariah near the end of the Old Testament here, you can go there. You can just listen either way. Zechariah is describing the day of the Lord, and like the day of the Lord, a lot of really cataclysmic, terrible things happen. But then there is, in pretty much every prophet, there's this point where kind of the clouds part and things start to turn. And after all these terrible plagues and things that are going to destroy everybody, in Zechariah 14:16, Zechariah says, "Then everyone who survives of all the nations that have come against Jerusalem," so Jerusalem's enemies, "shall go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Booths." And we are told if anyone doesn't go up to the Feast of Booths, then there will be no rain on them. But the idea is that in Zechariah, this image of like the day of the Lord that he pulls on is the Feast of Booths. All the nations will go feast with Israel in these little mini Edens, right? So we have this day where the enemies of Israel kind of fall away as enemies and are brought in as guests to feast together. There's this beautiful like undoing of Babel happening here. So it's interesting that Jonah is making himself a Sukkot, presumably to see if the Ninevites get destroyed. He's making a little Eden for himself to see if his enemies are going to get struck down. It's also interesting because, again, when Cain leaves, Cain builds a city, And that's everything that we've already seen the parallels with Jonah there. That city becomes horribly violent and terrible, right? The place that Cain builds his shelter from the vengeance he's fearful of becomes this like hub of violence and vengeance, right? It's almost like we're being given two paths here. You can build a Sukkot where you welcome in these people and you feast together, or you can build a city to protect yourself from everyone else, and that city is eventually going to fill up with violence and vengeance. And it's interesting that as Jonah does this, he's invoking both. He's pulling on this beautiful image of hospitality and God bringing refuge in a place of desolation and hopelessness. But he's also doing it in a way that reminds us of like where the cycle of violence begins in Scripture, with this brother who feels vindictive about God choosing someone over him. But that's probably not. There's a lot to chew on there. So yeah, he builds this booth, and then God summons up plants to go up over it, which feels excessive. But we could also see maybe there's some Eden stuff happening there, in the same way that God brings, the fruit-bearing trees in the days of creation. Maybe that's happening here. It is interesting that Jonah, in Jonah 1 and Jonah 4, he runs away to the two places where the two different creation stories begins. There's two creation stories in Genesis 1 and 2. One starts with water everywhere, and one starts with no water anywhere. So in Jonah 1, Jonah runs away to the chaos waters, and in Jonah 4, Jonah runs away to the barren wilderness. Almost to like an anti-creation thing, which is also very interesting because Jonah means dove, which brings us back to Noah, which is a whole anti-creation thing. And then isn't it interesting that God starts making vegetation happen in the wilderness for Jonah, just like he does in Genesis 2, which we'll talk more about next week because there's a lot of stuff going on there. The plant that he brings up is interesting because we don't really know what it is. It goes untranslated in a lot of Jewish translations of like that the Jewish people use for their Bibles. They just leave it untranslated as kikayon. There's all kinds of theories about what this plant is. Is it a castor oil plant? Is it a ricinus plant? Is it a gourd? Whatever. What's funny about it is this word kikayon. I think this is the author of Jonah having a cheeky little joke. Sounds like three words. Ki is the word for vomiting. Ka is the word for vomit. So these are just different forms. And yon sounds kind of like Jonah, doesn't it? We have in Genesis or Jonah 1/2, Jonah is saved by being vomited out of a fish, right? And we're going to have this strange thing happening in Jonah 4 where this plant that invokes the idea of vomiting is sent to save Jonah again. Because interesting, if we're looking at verse 6, why does it say that God appoints the plant? What's the point of it? Shade his head, yeah, so that. Yeah, I, again, not a Bible scholar. I'm going to take issue with that translation because that word for discomfort is ra. Right? It might be a shade over his head to save him from his ra, which is a word that can mean something like discomfort. It can mean something like destruction. It can mean evil. And I do think maybe the author is giving us a little both and picture here. This plant is going to save Jonah from his discomfort, even though he already had a shelter that had shade. So what's going on there? But also maybe this plant has a deeper purpose. There is some evil that Jonah is doing that he needs to be saved from. And this plant is going to bring that salvation. So what does Jonah need to be saved from? it's weird because he brings the plant, Jonah's super happy, and then God immediately kills the plant with a word. That seems like a weird way to save Jonah, right? We mentioned that the use of a worm is kind of weird, kind of specific. Can you think of anywhere else that worms show up in the Old Testament? Death, yeah. We hear a lot about it in the New Testament. It's often used to describe Gehenna, a place where the worm does not die. And yeah, the idea of like worms is definitely a death image. There's a very specific story where worms play a big role. I don't. Well, yeah. There's something about Herod has a real gnarly death, but that's New Testament. So yeah. The big one I'm thinking of is the manna, right? So when God in Exodus 16 provides manna for the people, he gives them really specific instructions, right? And one of those instructions is that gather only what you need and don't try to save it for the next day. Which, like, I work in like the personal finance space, so I'm like, no savings. But there seems to be an important lesson here, because also, interestingly, you're not supposed to gather manna on the Sabbath. So the day before the Sabbath, you're supposed to gather 2 days, and that manna does not spoil. Blah. So physics out the window. But we are told in Exodus 16, starting in verse 19, Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over till the morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Shocking. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. So another thing that makes this interesting is that and why I think this is the parallel we're supposed to see, is that we're told that God appoints a worm. That word in Hebrew for appoint is manna. So, Rashi points it out too, so that's not me being clever. But there seems to be something we're supposed to be harking back to this, which again, like, this isn't a story about the people being like, God's not being just, God should kill our enemies. Why were the people saving the manna? Why would you keep extra even if God told you not to? Yeah, you don't trust God. You're like, what if there's no manna tomorrow? I'll just keep some just in case, right? What if God doesn't have enough or doesn't show up the next day to provide for me, right? Over and over again, the author of Jonah is hammering us with these stories of people who just do not trust that God loves them. Something happens, Pharaoh's coming, Abel's offering gets accepted, God tells them to not save manna, and something about that triggers in whatever character we're looking at, God must not love me, I need to look out for myself. Or I just need to die, I guess I'll just die, in the case of the Israelites. Oh, man. Yeah.
Going back to the plant, I pull up the Orthodox Jewish Bible, and it says that deliver him from his displeasure.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, yeah, he does. Yeah, they're probably tying that back to him being like, this was an evil thing. So yeah, saving him from, this feels like a cheap way to say it, saving it from his attitude or something, saving him from the way he's seeing the world potentially. That's an interesting translation. Yeah, I could get behind that. Yeah. So yeah, we have this recurring theme of God probably won't, or not even probably, God might not take care of me. God might not care for me. We also see this in something we could probably spend an entire class on, and if I'd planned better, we would have, that Jonah is constantly being paralleled with Elijah. So yeah, Elijah, a prophet who's all about justice. Jonah, a prophet who's all about justice, or at least justice that benefits Israel. Elijah, when he has his big showdown on Mount Carmel, he winds up running away. After that, there's a period of time where he falls asleep. But then there's that big encounter between God and Elijah, where God is basically being like, God, take my life, kill me, because I'm the only one left in Israel who loves you. I'm the only faithful person left in the world. And then God does this thing where he brings all of these crazy, supernatural phenomena in front of him. And he brings a firestorm and a great wind and an earthquake and all these things. Things that, like, if you look at the story of Elijah, he lives for this stuff, right? He's a drama queen. Like, bring the fire down on the altar, destroy everything. That's Elijah's style. God shows up in all those ways, but he's not in any of them, right? God was not in the fire. God was not in the earthquake. Where does God show up? He shows up in a still small voice, just a tiny little, the literal Hebrew is something like a nothing of a voice. It's like so tiny. And then God addresses Elijah, being like, hey, you're thinking about this wrong. There are other people besides you who are faithful to me. There are many more besides that. And I don't always operate in like these big fiery ways. Sometimes I operate in these little whispers, right? Maybe that's even how I prefer to operate. Maybe that's my modus operandi. And then Elijah, beloved prophet, says, kill me.
Could it also be harkening back to Job, when God speaks to
Yeah.
Job and said, who are you to question me?
Absolutely.
I'm God, I can do what I want.
This, we don't get a lot of dialogues in the Bible of like someone snarking at God. Job is a big one. Notice too that in Job, we go to animals, right? God's like, your picture of what's important to me is like this small, and what I'm looking at is like this, right? And yeah, Job, what is Job wrestling with? He's like, this is unjust. I'm being treated unjustly. I've lived a good life, and yet God is doing this to me. Does God care about me at all? I wish I were dead. So yeah, lots of parallels there. There is, I'm going to do this to chew on, because I'm not sure if this is what's happening, but it really strikes me as highly coincidental if it's not happening. So you can look into this if you want. This is very much like a 50-40% confidence on this parallel. But when Elijah goes out into the wilderness, do you remember how he gets food? Ravens, right? So he gets food from ravens. Where else do we see ravens in the Bible? The ark, yeah. So there's a really weird scene on the ark where they're trying to figure out if there's still land out there. And so Noah sends out a raven. And what we're told is the raven just goes back and forth, never like really leaves the ark, never like goes and does its job. And then God sends out what? A dove. Jonah, dove. So we have Jonah, who's being paralleled with Elijah. I forgot. How quickly we forget. Jonah's being paralleled with a dove, but he's also being paralleled with Elijah, who is pretty strongly paralleled with ravens. There's an interesting rabbinic tradition about the raven, because it's like, why include the raven thing? What's the point of this? The rabbis say that the raven didn't leave the ark because it was afraid that Noah was going to kill the other raven. Because something you'll notice is they bring more of all the clean animals on the ark than they do the unclean animals. So there's only 2 ravens. And so the rabbis are like, he keeps hanging around because he thinks that Noah's going to kill his partner while he's gone. Which is just another potentially interesting callback to not trusting God there. Jonah is kind of called to be a dove to go out in faith and bring life. And instead, he seems to be kind of hovering around his own concerns. Maybe kind of a stretch. But we'll probably get to the cattle stuff next time. But I want to get to this because I think this is this to me is the big symbol crash of Jonah. Is God teaches him this whole lesson, which we're going to talk about next time, Because if you notice something about God, he transforms halfway through the story in Jonah 4. Because 2 times God says, do you do well to be angry? But it's 2, I'm not saying this heretically, I'm saying this literarily. It's 2 different gods that say it. If you look, verse 4, and the Lord said, that's Yahweh, do you do well to be angry? But then if we go down to verse 9, but Elohim said to Jonah, do you do well to be angry? That's weird. We'll talk about that next time. But let's talk about what I think is really underpinning Jonah's concerns here. And we've been kind of circling it, but I think this is the real icing on the cake here. Is Jonah makes this bizarre complaint in verse 2. I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. This is why Jonah wants to die. This is why he didn't want to go to Nineveh, is because God is too nice, seems like. What is going on there? So this verse, this comes to us from Exodus. And it's essentially this time where Moses is like, Lord, show me your glory. And again, we would expect maybe like fire or wind or earthquakes or whatever. But instead we have this very strange thing where like God shows Jonah his back. But also God makes this pronouncement about who he is. And it's this: a gracious God, merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, relenting from disaster. And it goes on. This is like the John 3:16 of the Old Testament. It is quoted absolutely everywhere. The prophets talk about it all the time. So it's really interesting then that Jonah misquotes it. There's one thing that he leaves out. There's one word. God's gracious, he's merciful, he's slow to anger, he's abounding in steadfast love, he's relenting from disaster. God also says he's faithful. Jonah leaves that out. And if we think about it for a second, Jonah's name, we talked about this way at the beginning, Jonah isn't just Jonah, he's Jonah, son of Amittai. Amittai is a name that means true or faithful. Jonah's deep concern, his deep wound, is he's like, sure, God, you can be merciful, you can be compassionate, you can be all those things. That's great, but you can't say you're this. If you are going to look at this kind of city that wants to destroy us and will destroy us someday and give them a pass because they said they were sorry and did a little performative repentance, then you might be merciful, but you're not faithful. Which is interesting. He's not even saying that God's not just, although I think that's there. It's that you can't say that you love us if you also are going to show love to them. Oh, man. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is exactly this. I think this is something that the Pharisees wrestle with. If you look at the parable of the 2 sons, I think this is exactly what the older brother is wrestling with. Dad doesn't love me. Dad loves the younger brother. I did everything right, but then younger brother comes home and he gets the feast. He gets welcomed in, to the party. God, you're merciful, but you're not faithful. And that paints Jonah a very different way, right? That kind of paints Jonah's drama differently. He's not just petulant. He's not just like, I really want to see these guys die. All of this is saying to him, the way that he's seeing the world is, God loves these people more than he loves me. God loves Abel and he doesn't love me. God did all this stuff, led us out of Egypt, led us into the wilderness, and now he's just leaving us out to dry because these people said they were sorry and did some nice things. And what I want to, that I think is something we should just sit with in general, is that maybe at the core of a lot of our judgmentalness or our hard-heartedness is this, that when we see God doing something for someone else, it raises this question of, God, do you actually love me? Are you going to have manna for me tomorrow? Are you going to save me from the Egyptians? Are you going to look on my offering ever? Or am I always going to be the person in the shadows? That this is maybe at the core of all of this. That maybe this is what Jesus is talking about when he says looking at the world with a good eye versus an evil eye. An evil eye is if God loves someone else, then zero sum, he doesn't love me. Or not as much. God doesn't care about what I do. He doesn't care about me going to church or all these things I'm trying to do or how much I'm trying to like be faithful to him and his word. He just does whatever he wants. So I think that is something we should just sit with in general, because I think that's at really the core of Jonah's conflict. But what I want to suggest is that this whole book is really about this tension. It's about this tension of God is a merciful God, and we all love that when it is for us. But when it goes to someone else, it gets complicated. And when it goes to people who have legitimately done really terrible things, maybe to us or that have affected us, then all of a sudden, how do these two things square? How can God be merciful and good? Can God be so merciful that he stops being good? And what we're going to talk about next time is, I think, hidden in the story of Jonah is a little drama hidden in the name of God that plays with all this. So if you want to do homework for next week, read through Jonah again and just write down what God is called and when. Because there's a little story that emerges of, if you think of it almost as two characters, something happens. And we'll talk more about that next time. But we're already 2 minutes over. So I'm going to pray and set you free.